2026 is the year that you can really begin to leverage your expertise in multiple streams of income by speaking to many different audiences. The content and the expertise that you have in your keynote presentation and that story that you're telling and that big transformation that you're making in your keynote is great. But what about leveraging that and creating some training and some workshops and some corporate strategy around that? That adds a different impact to your presentation, and it allows you to monetize your expertise in multiple different ways for many different audiences. It's just making things a little bit more general and more identified towards a corporate audience. So I'm going to talk about 3 different tips today about how you can transition your expertise into some training workshops and into the trends that are really popular within business right now, and how you can really begin to develop a thought leadership business that's going to really transform your expertise into many different markets. The first thing I'll talk about is, as we think about transitioning our expertise, we have to think about our audience and we have to think about who we're speaking to. When we're speaking to a corporate audience, it's a little bit different than speaking to a keynote audience or speaking in front of an audience at an event. And the reason for that is that there's many different levels of expertise and knowledge in our audience. And we, as the speaker, have got to adapt to those things. And how we can do that is very specific. I think I've been a college professor for many years. I've taught many different levels of classes, whether it's a 100 level class or a 400 level class. And just in general, when you're teaching a 100 level class, you're speaking to a general audience, which is very different than speaking to a 400 level class, which is in a certain expertise. And if you're a doctor and you're in medical school, that's a whole different level of education than a science 101 class. So there's just different language that we use, and there's different things that we need to consider and different levels of knowledge we need to consider when we're speaking to different audiences. When we're speaking to a corporate audience, you're speaking from everybody that is a new hire in an organization to a trainer and a manager and a leader that has been at an organization for many different years. So thinking about how to speak to a general audience is something that is something to consider when we're transitioning our expertise in a certain way. The other thing that I always tell experts that are entering into the corporate training space is that it's not just the language and the level of knowledge that you have, that they're hiring you for that, but they're also hiring you because you're the expert to help their audience transform into what you promise that you are going to transform them into. So if you are a mindset coach and a mindset trainer, that you have the thing that you sell, which is how we transform your mindset. What a corporation's going to want to see is that, yes, I see the how that you're doing, but I really need to see the result of what you're doing, because I'm investing in you to be able to create a transformation with my employees. What am I going to see from that transformation? And one thing that I see that experts have, we talk a lot about our process. We're very tied to our process, but we're not talking much about the results. And that's really something that we need to lead first with in our promotion. And as we talk about what we have to offer our corporations and the workshops that we have to offer, is that what transformation is happening and what am I actually going to see in that space? How is that going to translate into dollars saved or productivity enhanced? How is that going to transition into that? So as a speaker that's selling your expertise, let's think more about results and how that transformation can help our audience rather than in just the how of what's going to happen. The other piece of advice that I always give to experts too is that your audience doesn't have nearly the expertise that you do in a topic. You're the expert in a room. How can you make those ideas relevant to an audience and relevant to the audience that needs to learn that knowledge? So you're not just telling people what you're doing, you're teaching them. And that's a different way of speaking and a different way of approaching things. So that's the first thing that I would tell you as you begin to transition into a corporate audience, is that you need to think about the results, and we need to think about how to speak to a general audience and prove that transformation. Let's talk about some corporate language and some trends that are really popular right now as we are getting into the space of transitioning your expertise into the corporate arena. Some things that every business is dealing with right now is automation and AI. And yes, it is important to have that in your background and to understand what that can do for your productivity. But there's a yearning for this human connection that corporations have right now. And how can I have this automation and have this amazing thing running in my business? But also, I don't want to lose that customer service, and I don't want to lose that cultural element that I have in my business. And so really talking about the human impact of how you can make an impact in that space and help that human communication and help that human connection, that is something that you can pair really nicely with all these automations and this AI that's beginning to really infiltrate our corporations. It means that you can show a measurable impacts with that, particularly when it comes to talking to corporations about how they improve performance and how you can improve retention and how these leadership strategies that you have can transition into more ROI for a business. That a business is going to want to invest in creating those human connections. The other thing that people are seeing in corporate strategy trends right now, even though the money has been cut from a lot of the DEI trends, it still remains a part of a lot of corporate strategies, particularly inclusion and belonging and diverse workspaces. Those things are still they're still being talked about. It would just be those ways of how this is all tied to the return on investment, and how it's connected to driving innovation and leadership within a business. So those are some things to think about. How can we use inclusion? How can we use these human-centered activities to be able to really help differentiate our material from the next person? So there are still some of those things that are transformational, that help you fit inside a corporate space. Some things to think about. If you're a communication consultant like myself, I would maybe speak about how I can help people communicate more effectively. When I think about how to propose that to a corporation, that I develop communication and influence skills that improve cross-functional collaboration and reduce costly miscommunication in a business. Remember to think about phrasing your ideas in a way that gives that instant ROI to a corporation, because that's where your workshop potential is going to come. So thinking about how to position your expertise in the one-to-many and also the measurable results way is a thing to think about for your business. The third tip that I would give for you in your workshop and transitioning your expertise is that it's so much less about the expertise and it's so much more about the action. Always building action into your presentations and always building a takeaway into your workshop. That's really the way that you can begin to make a big difference and make an impact in your corporate workshops, because that's what people want. They want less of the talking heads and they want more of the action. They want to see the results immediately and they want to walk away with action items that they can have. So if you have this great workshop on emotional intelligence, we can talk about emotional intelligence all the time and how important it is for humans to have emotional intelligence when they're talking to customers, when they're talking to other leaders, when they're engaging in their departments. Those things are so important, but we need to give them activity with it. Actually have them role play and actually have them involved in conversations. That's how we can engage the emotional intelligence in a way that really makes a difference for the leaders that are in an organization. So as you're thinking about transitioning your ideas into a more active way, that's what we can think about is how do I involve my audience more in a way, and how do I get them to be engaged in what I'm talking about so they can walk away with a solution. I think a good rule of thumb for your workshops and your presentations is to think about how your presentation should be a third of, if you have an hour-long presentation, your content should be a third, your activity should be a third, and then reflection and answers should be a third. And you can mix that up and however you want that. If you want to go from speaking for 10 minutes and activity for 10 minutes and then reflection for 10 minutes, and then you do that again, that's a really good way to break up your presentation, make it very active, and also have your audience walk away with something and walk away with a plan. So make your expertise actionable. That's my third piece of advice. So think about how to transition your expertise into one-to-many and into a general audience that can show transformation. Also think about how to engage some of those corporate needs, whether it be resilience, whether it be retention, whether it be reducing turnover. All of those corporate languages can help you in your proposals. And then how can I put activity? How can I make my expertise actionable that can actually show a result in that time? Leverage your expertise in 2026. That is the way that you're going to be able to build a business out of your thought leadership. And that's a way that you can transition and what you talk about every day, what you're an expert in, let's put that in front of more people and let's make a bigger impact. That's how you can leverage your expertise.